the past 3 months, we've been.
Very good.
I know. I finally didn't say a week. Past 3 months, we've been examining and investigating the cellular components, like the proteins, the molecular machines, and the difficulties in evolution, explaining how they came about. So this month, we are expanding that further and saying, okay, what does that mean for multicellular organisms? So there's a lot of complexity in the cell, but there's additional layers of complexity in multicellular organisms. And the question, the big idea is, can Darwin's evolution account for the origins of the complexity we find in multicellular organisms?
Yes.
All right, shut the class down.
That is the mainstream science view. That's how that comes about. So I mean, every living thing contains DNA, and that's made up of amino acids, and then those come into proteins, and then we get the cell, and there's a lot of complexity there. But cells aren't generic. We talked about how in Darwin's day, they viewed cells as like generic blobs of cytoplasm, and they were just little blobs of jelly. But that's not how cells actually work. So cells specialize in our bodies, in plants and animals, and all multicellular organisms. There are the specializations has categories, which is known as tissues. It should be a fairly familiar term. There are 2 main branches of life. We have animal life and then plant life at the very base of the tree. And plants and animals both have specific types of tissues. So plants have tissue types called ground, dermal, and vascular. And then animal tissue types, including us, they broke down in 4 main categories, which is epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. So those are the main types of tissues found in life as we know them. Those are just the broad categories. There's extra specialization within each of those categories. Last week, I also mentioned the word body plans. So that also comes into play here because, so there's kind of like a structure to life. At the very bottom, you have the amino acids, and then the proteins, and then the cells, and then tissues. Then the tissues then form organs, and the organs then form your body plan. So the body plan is the top of the pyramid, amino acids at the bottom. And we talked a little bit about how, these body plans are hard to explain. They're at the very top level. Like, how do you get from amino acids to body plans? It's a very difficult question. One of the concepts that kind of comes into play, and it's an engineering concept, it's called top-down design. So if you're going to design something, I work in my profession is I design software. So I often have to think through what are all the functional things I need this software to do. And then I create a plan, and then you execute on that plan. I don't just think about what some random button is going to say. I have to think through what the whole application is going to do, and then I have to design it according to plan. So this idea of saying, okay, what is the purpose? And then how does so in life situation, it's like you almost have to start with the body plan and then figure out the organs and then figure out the tissues. So you have to go from the top of the pyramid down to the amino acids. And I think the real crux of that, it comes down to purpose. Like, We have arms so we can interact with the world. We have legs so we can walk around. We have connective tissue so that it holds our bodies together and gives us structure. We have nervous cells so that we can communication signals can be sent throughout the body. These are all like systems that need engineering to make a body effective. And I think the question is, how does that happen? How does that happen in evolution through the theory of evolution? And I guess maybe I'll say, like, what do you guys think is, like, how do you think an evolutionist would explain how that happens?
I mean, how they would explain how you go from nothing, like simple complexity, to extreme complexity of a body plan,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
I mean, they would just say that your tiny little blobs floating together, coming together, just started determining what was most beneficial for the environment they're in, and then changing to benefit themselves the most for that situation. Because we would look at it and we would say, okay, we have this body plan that has arms, a nervous system, but for what purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And for us, we would say, like, well, the Lord knew we would need to be doing tons of stuff, and he had the whole complexity planned out and then worked backwards, like from the top of the pyramid down.
Right.
But evolutionists would say it was the other way, and somehow these non-thinking, non-entity things decided to come together in certain ways to start building proteins and then cells, and then it was advantageous for the wriggly fish to want to come out of the water, and so it decided to grow legs, or it died, and then if it died, it didn't grow, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of chance and like theory and what ifs and maybes, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, that's more or less correct. I mean, it's a series of small incremental changes that makes you go from something simple, air quotes, to something more complex.
Mm-hmm.
And, those have to be, like we've talked about in the past, beneficial changes at every step, right? Like if it's not beneficial, it's not going to get passed on. So every step has to be a functional, beneficial step towards
An unknown purpose.
an unknown. It's just to survive and to pass on and like that. It's just this genetic self
Pushed by
purpose.
the environment that
Yeah.
it's in, pretty
Yeah.
much is what would force it to the next level.
Yeah, but then I think the challenge is the specifics. So it's like that's theoretically plausible, and I think that's where they come at. Like that's why it's a theory,
Right.
Maybe that's how it happened, and then the question is there evidence of that? And like we've talked in the past, there's certainly evidence of microevolutionary changes on small scales. Like that's what Darwin observed in the finches.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we observe in dog breeds. Like there's definitely changes that happen based off of environmental conditions. The question is, does that explain all of life in all the diversity that we see? And did we go from something very simple all the way to the diversity that is evident? So if we get back to like the tissues concept and the specialization of tissues, think through like how that comes about through small incremental beneficial changes. Like how does a chance mutation evolve a cell to specialize for a specific role, like let's say nervous system, when like the system itself, its purpose doesn't exist yet,
Right.
right? Like a
Yeah.
single nervous nervous system cell doesn't, presumably have some purpose yet because it has dependencies.
Looks like going back to the rotary tail, the whatever that we talked
Oh
about.
yeah, the
last month.
flagellum. Yeah.
Like you have these 17 parts or whatever. How did all 17 parts come at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a specific purpose.
Yep.
Yep. That's advantageous and beneficial and
Right here.
what's the word I'm just was saying, but so you have this kind of problem with tissue being specified.
So
Additionally, like tissues don't. Most of the tissues form systems, so most of our organs and stuff is actually from the epithelial tissue type, and so that's like our skin, but it's also like what is in the lining of our gut and our stomachs, and like a lot of our kind of inner organs have that sort of tissue in them. But to evolve a stomach out of that specialized tissue, like you also need a mouth,
Secret.
a throat, like you have to
Digestive system.
get stuff in.
Make sure it doesn't poison it and it can break it down and use it into simple sugars and fats and proteins.
Yep.
Crazy.
So like how, evolution, the theory of evolution would say, we talked about this also last week with the term co-option. So like that's how they explain a lot of these things is like, okay, maybe the stomach started out as just like a cellular wall. I don't know this exact how they would explain it, but they would say it was some kind of simplified purpose that then grew in complexity over time as it got more advanced. And again, that's plausible. It's improbable, but it's plausible. And I think one of the organs that's often used in intelligent design is the eye. And that has also been argued that like, hey, it could have started out as just a photosensitive cell.
Which they have done with the brain cells that popped out little like eyeballs in a petri dish.
That was weird.
That was very strange. You can look that up.
Really?
Yeah, they took brain cells and allowed it to grow. You gonna look it up? I know you're gonna look it up. And the picture is very strange because you think
a petri dish.
Yeah, but you think brain, you think human brain, and you have like this little tiny petri dish of brain cells, and then they watched it over, I don't know how much time it was, but then these two little black dots started to grow on the brain cell clump. And there it is. Looks like a little pancake with blueberries. But it was interesting because it's like the brain cells seemed, granted you can read the article, I'm sure they go into much more detail, but it was interesting to see that like these brain cells seem to understand that they need an ability to take in information from the outside. And if you're just brain cells, sure, it's like having a computer that has the ability to process information, but unless you feed it information somehow, then it just sits there and does nothing. And so it grew what they are calling eyeballs to seemingly pull in outside information to do what it is supposed to do. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So
Isn't that weird?
the theory of evolution says that we get all of the diversity of life from these changes. What would it require for one species to turn into another species? Like what are some of the changes that would need to occur to go from one body plan species to another one?
Full skeletal
Yeah.
and muscular. And like, what is it? Is it a possum? What animal is it? Oh, the hyenas.
Oh,
They can eat like anything. Poison, rotting food. Their stomach is designed, the acid level in their stomach is designed to eat anything and not die. So like actual functioning of the organs, because you have
Special.
fish that can breathe underwater and we have us that would drown.
Yeah,
So-
organ specialization for the
Yes.
environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like whole body plan changes, because otherwise, what makes it different?
Yeah.
There is no difference. So
Yeah.
classification.
Appendages,
Yeah.
entire limbs.
Thumbs. The ability to speak, process information, speak words.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many changes even at the macro level, at the top of the body plan level. But you think of how many changes need to happen at the protein level to support that bigger level. So you end up getting an onion of problems, right? So if you so life in general, like if let's say pretend you're a biologist and you're trying to explain life, that's a huge. It's like explain life. Well, where do you start? It's a huge problem. So then you break the problem into smaller pieces, and then when you have those smaller pieces, you say, oh, look, this could be explained by this improbable but feasible, potentially plausible thing. And then each level has its own highly improbable, but maybe it could happen. And then you multiply that at each of those levels. So like, the chances of amino acids randomly coming together to create proteins, and then proteins building molecular machines to support what it takes to make a cell, and then a cell diversifying into the right tissues that make a living and functionally viable multicellular organism. And like, that's a lot of hurdles to jump. And it starts to beg the question, like, does evolution actually explain all those layers of complexity? Like I think what happens is the field of biology gets so big because the problem is so big, and they divide the problems into very small problems, and they're like, okay, we have a theoretical framework that can explain this one tiny piece of it to some degree of acceptability, and it's like, yeah, we got that for all of these, so now we got a theory that kind of explains how life started and continues on. But when you start to look at it a little bit more critically, you start seeing this doesn't feel like a plausible explanation for the whole of what we see. So let's talk maybe a little bit specifically about like plants, because there's a lot of design in plants specifically. I would say the most fundamentally amazing thing about almost all plants is the fact that they do photosynthesis. So chloroplasts are the molecular machine. So a group of proteins that form a specific function is this chloroplast molecular machine. And those are found in green plants, and they capture energy from the sun using the green pigmentation called chlorophyll. And during photosynthesis, chloroplasts combine energy with water and carbon dioxide to create oxygen and sugars. And through other biochemical processes, the sugars serve to feed the plant and help it grow, and then minerals from the ground all coming together to make plants work. And not only is that process critical for plant life, all of the other life on Earth is built on top of plant life, because you have.
That's how it started in Genesis.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Genesis started with plants, then animals, and that's exactly what we see in nature. Probably just a coincidence. And we could not exist without plants, because we eat things that eat plants, and we eat plants directly sometimes. Not
If we have to.
If we're forced to, we do.
I'll stick to the white bread.
It's better.
So there's a dependency, and you have these ecological relationships that are mutually beneficial, because we give back to the plants too through manure and through
Our bodies.
that when we die, so like there is a cycle that exists between animals that is complex but well balanced.
It's like there's unity in design in that being. Just
Yeah,
kidding, sorry.
yeah.
That was nasty.
So like now you even have another layer of complexity in design, and it's not just a food cycle that we depend on plants. It's also oxygen and carbon dioxide cycle
And moisture.
and moisture.
Can we refer to it as a circle of life?
We can,
Only if you sing.
yeah, you have to sing the
Only have
song
to
as
sing
we
it.
say it.
Because some plants require like bees to pollinate
Yes.
each other.
Oh,
or
yes.
whatever.
Oh,
They
yeah,
have to have.
100%.
Yep.
All
Some
works
plants
together.
only
Yeah.
are pollinated by flies. Like not even just bees, but certain wasps and flies. It's crazy. Like there's
Yeah.
some plants
That's
in
just-
that book that we were talking about earlier, The Evolution of a Creationist. But that book, it's by Joe Martin. Anyway, it's an interesting book because it talks about different plants and animals. But there are certain plants that are the exact right size for a very specific wasp. That is the only bug that can pollinate it. And it's like, that is just wild. Any bigger, it would be something else. And that something else wouldn't eat or wouldn't roll in the pollen that flower needs for that pollination. It's very interesting, but going off topic, sorry. Love that book.
Yeah. So yeah, plants play an important role in the ecology, and there's like a whole nother level of complexity there. But if we go back to the plant cell, like the plant cells have specialized, like they're specialized. They have cell walls that animals don't have, which gives them the rigidity, and it makes them kind of more like Lego blocks than floating
Goo balls.
goo balls. And like they give the plant structure, and you see these in grasses and annuals, and it allows them to spread and grow quickly. And then you have things like trees and shrubs, which require an extra layer of specialization. Basically, woody plants are strengthened by the walls of their older dead cells. So like the dead cells end up being part of the structure of a tree. And they're
Is that the rings that we see? Are those
pretty
dead
much,
cells?
yeah. I think so.
That makes sense.
Yep. So yeah, like they, there's a living component to a tree, but there's also like its bones are almost the dead cells that are in it, which is kind of crazy, but it allows them to grow strong and tall. So the plant tissues, I mentioned them earlier, but we have what's called ground tissues, and that's the site where photosynthesis and food storage happens. And then dermal tissue on a plant is like the skin of a plant, and a lot of times it has like a waxy covering on it to help it protect it. But there's also specific derma called stomata that allows for the exchange of gases of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So like they're a pretty complex cellular structure just in itself, because it's protecting, just like a cell wall has to keep some things out. Actually, everything that it lives has this requirement of keeping some things out but letting some things in. Like our bodies are the same way. Like we have skin to protect us, but we got to take in nutrients and oxygen and stuff like that. So we need mechanisms to filter things out. Plants are the same way. They need to take in certain, they need to take in carbon dioxide and expel oxygen, where we do the opposite. And it's a fundamental aspect of life. Plants also have vascular tissues made of xylem and phloem. So xylem is what conducts water and materials from the roots upwards into the plant. And then phloem is the opposite, which it takes sugars and materials down from the leaves to the rest of the plant. And so that's the main 4 tissue types that plants have. Evolutionists are confident that there's a quote in here in this book. It says, evolutionists are confidently assert that they know that the plant structure has evolved, going as far as to say and declare that there are overwhelming evidences that all land plants evolved from primitive water-dwelling plants. However, a evolutionist, Brian Capone, admits that scientists don't fully understand how plants develop. He says, how this process of cell differentiation takes place is still not precisely understood, nor is it known how tissues assume the unique pattern and characterization, such as the anatomy of roots, stems, and leaves. These are only some of the many unsolved mysteries around plant development. So, like, on one hand, you have this very confident, hey, this stuff involved, and on the other hand, it's like, well, we don't even really know how leaves form.
It's involved, but we don't
You
know
know,
how.
it's like there seems to be some,
A lot of gaps.
yeah, there's a lot of like it's like we're confident that this is happening, but we don't really know how. And then it's like, how can you say that that's
What are those one things called that plants grow? Start with a G.
galls,
Is it galls?
something like that? Yeah,
Like, I remember reading an article about that not that long ago.
yeah, that's interesting.
Because, like, if you've ever looked at a plant, different, I don't know if it's specific to certain plants or if all plants do this, but I remember reading this article specifically because it was from someone who's not a creationist. They are more of a botanist, and just talking about how confusing, I think they're called galls. I think you're right.
Yeah,
But they're little tumors that grow on plants, like little bumps that grow on leaves, maybe the stems. I've seen them on leaves. I just thought it was part of it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
My
They
tree has
do-
tons of them.
They don't know why, but the plant grows those to protect bugs. There is no benefit to the plant at all because it's a pest. You have this bug on the tree that is a pest. You'll have to look it up and get into more detail. I can't remember the specifics. But basically, that's what it is plants grow these galls and protect these little bugs to no benefit of the plant. It's 100% beneficial to the bug. And there's like, botanists are like, we have no idea why. Because there's no purpose. There doesn't seem to be a black and white thing as to why these plants have always done this for a very long time. And I'm sure someday someone will probably figure out that there's a protein or like a gas exchange, and that will be wonderful. But so far, it's like the plants are like, I got you for no reason
So
for this bug.
That'd
That's
be
it.
contrary to the idea that,
Everything is for the benefit
that
of
it's
the original.
beneficial.
Yep. It's very strange.
It's interesting.
yeah. So that kind of covers the plant tissues and kind of the plant life cycle. And I mean, you can see there's a lot of complexities going in there. There's a lot of interrelational dependencies between systems. Again, like my career as a software designer, dependencies come in all the time. Like certain systems depend on other systems, so you can't build a system without this fundamental layer over here first, and that is all over life. And how does that incrementally happen? It's tough to explain. In my view, evolution does not do it well. So let's move to animals, like instead of plants. And I think these tissues are probably a little bit more familiar because we're animals. We are built like animals, and we have the same tissue types. So nervous tissue, I'm sure you guys are aware that nervous tissue is
Has a lot of anxiety.
Tons.
it does.
Didn't.
Good one. No, it's what our brains are made of, and our spinal cords. They're responsible for sending signals and processing things in our brains, which is a very whole another topic. But a single nerve cell is called a neuron. They are, they're an interesting cell in and of themselves. They have dendrites and axons. So the dendrites are like the pieces that go out, and the axion is kind of like this tail-like structure. And they they send impulses from one another. There's a lot that goes into those. I don't think I'll cover all of that, but their biological functions, like the purpose for them existing, is no less than triggering a heartbeat or detecting heat and cold and processing pain and making sure that our automatic systems are working. Very important cell type.
We don't notice them until they're not working correctly.
Yeah, which is probably true of all of these, but I think what's interesting about nervous cells, and honestly this applies to all of these tissue types, but why would they exist without their function of transmitting signals? That's a head scratcher. Maybe it was like some kind of muscle signal of twitching, so you twitch through the water or something like that.
But you see people that's a disorder that usually isn't diagnosed until a kid is 7 or 8 years old. But it's a genetic disorder where pain is not your nervous system is not functioning properly, and you have these kids that don't feel pain, and nobody notices until an arm is broken or they bite their tongue off, bite a chunk off their tongue, they get burnt, and you recognize that these kids, it's not a fear thing, because sometimes they get they're autistic and so they're not communicating, or they have no fear, but it's that they don't experience pain because their nervous system is not functioning the way it's supposed to. And you look at them and you're like, now that would be ideal. How cool would it be not to feel pain, not to feel broken things and things like that? And it's okay, so there's a living example of if this nervous system just existed but didn't do what it seems to be designed to do, and their lives are not better. Because when you break your leg and don't know about it, and then it sets funny because it's not telling you that now your bone is not where it should be, their limbs grow inappropriately sized, or they get infections because there's a burn or a break or a cut and they don't know it, and it doesn't bother them because their nervous system isn't saying ouch, 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 fix it. And so then they get sick and things like that. So the fact that it functions for the entire body had to be thought through prior to, because you have an example of what happens when you have it and it's not doing its purpose and it's not beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and think about this, let's say I evolved a new organ. Somehow it happened. Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit worrisome, but it wouldn't do anything unless it was integrated through the nervous system, right? Just because it's there, it also has to be hooked up.
Otherwise, it's a tumor.
Yeah,
You take it out.
Exactly.
That's not supposed to be there.
Yeah, it's like putting a new engine in a car and not wiring it up. Wiring is probably more work than putting the engine in a lot of cases. And the interesting thing is evolutionary explanations of new organs rarely, if ever, account for the neurocircuitry necessary to control them. So that's how do you explain that? There is no explanation. There's a good thinker in intelligent design, David Berlinski, wrote if these changes come about simultaneously, it makes no sense to talk of gradual evolution. If they do not come about simultaneously, it is not clear why they should come about at all.
You would like David Berlinski.
Yeah, you would.
You need to look him up.
Okay, I'm on it.
Okay.
He's a mathematician, and
He's Jewish by birth.
I was just
And
gonna say Polish.
Yeah. But Like God is just not interesting, needed, or desired by him at all. He's probably not well loved by people because he's just so intelligent and highly thought of himself. But at the same time, he would be someone that you would look at and be like, well, evolution all the way, like mechanics and this and that, natural processes. But his books and his discussions, it's the complete opposite. He's like, how do you not see that there's design in this? Designer, who cares? But I appreciate his perspective because he's rude, but he calls it for what it is, regardless, and doesn't acknowledge a designer in any way. It's purely, I look at this and
he
I
doesn't
see,
acknowledge religion.
right,
But he's a critic of evolution.
right, that's a better way to put it.
So,
So he's not on either side. He's just in the middle, realizing that there's too many gaps in the
Yes.
evolution, but the designer is too far fetched or something.
yeah, like I think he's open to a designer, but he doesn't know. I could presume he would say he just doesn't know.
Yeah,
And like that's as far as he'll go.
which is valid. Like you can't know, but like that's where faith comes
He
in.
doesn't know what.
Like you can't just like go knock on God's door and be like,
Oh.
"Are you God? Nice to meet you. Can I like get a DNA sample exam?" Blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah.
You know, with many faiths, including Christianity, there's a jump of faith,
Yeah.
right? Like there's this like, oh, but I know, but like here's where I'm jumping to
Yep.
in a faith aspect.
Yes.
He's not willing to do that, but he
yet.
sees the
He's creeping towards the end of the like line, so maybe right before he enters eternity. He doesn't have many days left. I don't.
But he's a great thinker. Has a lot of interesting stuff.
His interviews are fantastic.
What's this guy's name?
David Berlinski, Berlinski.
He's very eccentric, and so when you find him, you'll know.
I'm
Usually,
reading like his little bio on his
Mhm.
website. He uses a lot of interesting words.
yes, he does.
Morass,
Yep.
raconteur.
And he like sits with a cane. I don't think he actually
Shivers.
needs it, but he like has it. And
If
reading
it's-
all his
if it's-
interviews, he just sits there with his cane. I'm like, what are you doing with that? He really hates his ex-wives, like a lot. Talks about it a lot.
Ex-wife.
Ex-wives.
I don't remember that.
He talked about it with Stephen Meyer when they had an interview. Anyway,
So I mean, so in the animal kingdom, an example of an interesting neurological adaptation would be echolocation in bats and in dolphins. How do you like? That's a challenging thing to explain.
Did you say echolocation?
Yeah, yeah. So
Radar.
yeah, bats like
Thank you.
they chirp and then they hear, and then that's how they navigate while flying around.
but it's not just hearing. It's like the electronic or the
they
waves.
Yeah, they sense how far they are
Yeah.
from things. It's basically their way of seeing the world.
Which people do. There's a blind person that I saw on a show not that long ago. He's blind and he's figured out, he walks into a room and he clicks.
Yeah.
Do you remember seeing that?
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
think it was like on the History Channel a million years ago.
Yeah.
But that guy, he walked into a room and he would click. He would make clicking sounds with his tongue. And
Kinda
he
get an idea of-
used echolocation as a human.
It's like he's like Daredevil.
Kind of, yeah. You wouldn't know.
Sorry.
But yeah, that's kind of it. But echolocation is an interesting thing to explain evolutionary because, like, you can't. Okay, you send a signal, and you hear it come back. You have to process what that means, and bats do it in a way where they can do it fast enough and with enough accuracy where they can fly,
Yeah.
which is pretty incredible.
It's okay.
Okay, so moving on to muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is pretty self-explanatory. It's the muscles, and there are multiple types of muscle tissue. There's smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. So smooth muscles are going to be like the ones found in your gut, and they're kind of like the ones that are used in organs to push food through.
Your stinkers.
Yeah.
You have a whole bunch of them, not just one.
Yeah.
You have a whole bunch.
So and then cardiac are obviously your heart muscles, and then skeletal muscles are the ones you use to move around. Muscle tissue is driven by a specific, there's many molecular machines involved, but myosin is probably the most important one. And it's a molecular machine that pulls itself along a track. It's composed of long proteins called actin filaments and to form the base of muscle contraction. So when a muscle movement happens, it requires the combined action of trillions of myosin motors. So you think, like we move all the time, but like trillions of these molecular machines are contracting at the same time just for one single muscle movement, and all of that is coordinated to work flawlessly.
Yeah.
Really, 99.9% of the time.
Unless you sneeze, we're on for your back.
Yeah, that's. We have a chapter on that.
Do we really?
Well, we have there's a chapter coming up on the idea of poor design in nature.
Yes.
Like it's a counter argument to intelligent design.
Yeah.
Like the appendix and like the
Laudanum.
the what's the term called? The like useless organs. I can't remember the term off the top of my head. It's almost there, but it's up.
It's like your uvula. What's that there for? The dangly thing in the back of your throat.
Oh, it's the gag reflex.
Well, some people don't have that. Like, what then? What's it there for? People get it taken out all the time. I've seen it. What's it there for? I'm just saying.
Yeah, I did not research that ahead of time, so I
But
can't.
you do like a
explain.
strep throat thing, and kids are like, whatever. I'm like, how? What's
those
wrong?
are your tonsils. Is that what you're thinking of?
No.
No, that's
I know.
hanging down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your uvula. What is that there for?
It's for gag reflex.
I don't believe it.
I'm almost positive.
I don't believe it.
Joshua can look it up.
We're
I
Keep
do
your
it from choking.
Is it?
Big
Yeah.
stuff from
Yeah.
going down there.
It's right back. There's no way. It's not gonna
I wish I could just brush my teeth without gagging. I get made fun of all the time. Tori will be in the kitchen making breakfast, and then from the bathroom she goes,
Sorry, just brushing my teeth. That's hilarious. Like sword swallowers.
Yeah,
Like, so you can overcome it. So
Yeah, for
what's
sure.
it there for? If it's no longer useful,
That is useful.
I'm just saying, it doesn't seem to be.
You can just get by without it.
It seems to be up for debate. This article says it's to prevent food from choking you. This one says it secretes saliva to moisten your mouth. This person says it helps your speech.
What?
It's probably all of those things. to be
Probably
honest.
none of those things. It's just there. It's a growth that's hanging from the back of our throats to be weird.
Maybe that's it.
Do all animals have it? Anyway, I'm gonna look this up
Are
later.
we skipping ahead?
Yeah, I don't think we have.
Let's talk about the uvula.
I don't think we talk about the uvula specifically,
We should.
but it's obviously something that interests you, so we can dive
Only
into it.
in humans.
Is it? See? It's not, it's...
According to the sagepub.journalist.com.
Yep.
Wikipedia. So an example of maybe an extreme muscular animal might not be what you would expect, but hummingbirds are extremely impressive and efficient creatures. Like their bone structure is super powerful and muscular, so that allows their wings to beat up to 75 times per second or higher. That's what the humming sound comes from. Their metabolism is on like overdrive, meaning that they end up having to eat over their body weight every day. I can't remember where that was in that in here, but yeah, they have to eat a lot. They're also extremely like their flying ability is out. Like our most advanced helicopters and planes have nothing on a hummingbird. They can hover upside down.
Crazy. Is it
It's-
what's the, like, is there a lot of similarities with dragonflies and hummingbirds?
Probably in their maneuverability, I would
Okay.
say, but like the way they
Obviously the structure is
accomplish it
very
is different.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dragonflies are very efficient flyers as well, but
Yeah.
that's because they have the quad wings.
And if you've seen Dune,
They have what?
The quad wings.
Oh, quad wings, yes.
I know you have.
Yeah.
You're welcome for that,
Quadcopters.
Jake.
I would say a good argument to support that is how humans design things after animals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very
They're like, oh, let's design a syringe that's like a cutting, like a mosquito.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Devices puncturing. Or
Yeah, we look for inspiration in nature all the time. I mean, there's a whole field of bio mimicry is what it's called, I think. Biomimicry engineering. And yeah, a lot of research is done in that. In like even in robotics, they're using
Night vision.
those things.
I don't know. Did
I don't
they
think so.
like study things that see in the dark for night vision? How
I'm
did
not
they
sure.
figure that out?
I'm not sure. They use all with a random example.
I'm curious.
It works.
Night vision goggles.
Let's go, guys. Next month.
Yeah. A hummingbird's heart beats 500 to 600 times a minute.
Crazy.
And when they're like really going, it can go as fast as 100 times or 1,000 times per minute. That's
Insane.
They call that tachycardia.
You need to calm down.
Yeah. The amount of design in like the hummingbird is pretty amazing as like a like it beats all of the things mankind has made for sure.
It's the resting heart rate of a hummingbird.
It doesn't
Dead.
rest.
Dead. It will die.
Yes, you're right. It's very restful in that case.
250.
Jeez. That's awful. I mean, good for it. It's supposed to be that way.
So epithelial tissue, we talked about that a little bit. It's meant for protecting outer surfaces of the body, keeping bacteria and other elements, harmful elements out. It's also, like I mentioned, like responsible for absorbing nutrients and keep. So not only does it keep things out, but it absorbs certain things in. One interesting example in the animal kingdom of epithelial is actually fish lungs or fish gills. They have special mechanisms. So like saltwater fish have special mechanisms to keep salt out, and freshwater fish have special mechanisms to keep salt, like full salt in, which is why you can't have salt. Like that's why they're
But they
different.
think that, but like they have found sharks in the Mississippi.
That's more of like they can tolerate it,
Okay. Because
so
I just
like-
assumed they would just die, but it's a toleration level.
Yeah, it's I haven't looked into it specifically,
Yeah.
but my guess would be that sharks live in the ocean,
Yeah.
not in fresh water.
Sure.
So like their gills are keeping salt out for the most part, and they get most of the salt they need, so they can think of it as like holding their breath for
Sure.
like something of that nature where they can go into rivers and stuff like that for quite a ways, but they couldn't stay there for.
Forever.
I don't think so.
Could it be an example of some microevolution?
Yeah.
If they're constantly in the area where what do they call that? Brackwater?
Yeah.
Brackish
Where
water.
it's-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where it's kind of mixed and
they get more
eventually
tolerant.
can develop
Yeah,
gills that
yeah.
maybe are more
Flexible.
freshwater
Yeah.
tolerant.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting call because we do see microevolution, we do see adaptations, we do see things like that, and like I've said multiple times, it's like a lot of the theories of evolution are plausible.
Yep.
It's not that they're like ridiculous, like an individual theory of evolution. It's like, yeah, that's plausible. I see why people hold to that.
Yeah.
But I think it's the cumulative, the abductive argument of like all of these things put together makes it harder to say that it's a valid hypothesis. And there's just a lot of holes in it. Those things alone are reasons to have doubt on the validity of the complete evolution theory. However, there are, I would never, this is a personal opinion. I would never say like, hey, let's get rid of the evolution of theory, the theory of evolution. I think there are uses for it. Like we're learning stuff from it. Like it's pushing like people are doing experiments, they're doing research. The thing that I have the biggest problem with is their dogmatic approach to it. Like the fact that they're only willing to think through this one materialistic explanation. Yeah, it's a framework for understanding how things come together, but it's not the only framework you can use. Intelligent design is a valid framework for understanding and interpreting the evidences.
It seems
But-
fringe because you're bringing in a deity, and they're like, "What?"
Well, and yeah, like I think that's the distaste is it gets wrapped up in creationism and religion and stuff like that, and they're like, oh, that's not us.
It's not hard science.
Yeah, but like just saying that there's an intelligent actor that seems to be playing a role. I mean, that doesn't require religion. I mean, you can say, hey, aliens did it. That's an intelligent actor. I mean, it still begs the question of where they came from, but you can push that out. But like, so like, it's not necessarily a religious thing. I mean, it can be a scientific area of research. So yeah. Continuing forward, the last one, connective tissue. As you can imagine, that is like cartilage, bone, tendons, that sort of thing. The things that build the structure of being animals. A lot of times you can think of. Okay, so I'll get there in a second. But one example they give of some extreme animal connective tissue would be in like elephants. They have obviously giant bodies that need a lot of connective tissue, but their feet have special. If you look at an elephant foot, it kind of looks like fake. It just kind of looks like a nub. It's like I don't know.
Like
They
an
look
X-ray
weird.
of it from just like the outside.
Just from the outside, it's
Yeah.
just like the leg,
Yeah,
and then it's
like
just
a
like
tree
squared
stump.
off. I don't know. Yeah, tree stump. Yeah, that's a good example.
Yes.
Yeah. But the bottom of their foot is actually very sensitive. Not like maybe to touch, but like their bottom of their feet are sensitive to infrasound. So elephants make infrasound. That's one of the ways they communicate. So infrasound being very low frequency sounds below human hearing, and like they are able to make these sounds. And the sound, infrasound, can travel through solid material very well in very long distances. So it goes through the ground, and elephants' feet can pick up these infrasounds that are shaking the ground.
And they look like our feet in high heels.
That they do. Yeah.
Huh.
They did that at the he talked when they were talking about the ankle.
Oh
In
yeah.
Philadelphia. Didn't they talk about the elephant's foot because
No.
it's like
I remember.
they're so similar and like the ankle itself is so well engineered,
Yeah.
and yet it's a little different in humans because of our ability to do that, like to run, to walk, to go from like nothing to movement. And like I think they showed a picture of an elephant's foot because you're like, is that a person in a giant boot, like X-ray wise? And they're like,
Right.
it's an elephant's foot because that design, that engineer of an ankle is just so pristine that it translates amongst a lot of mammals, but ours is different because of our upright ability to walk, run, skip, all of that.
Yeah.
So ours is just a touch different with our muscles. I
Yeah.
think connective tissue. Anyway,
So, talking about all these tissue types and how bodies come together for multicellular organisms, we can draw some analogies, right? So we as humans, we engineer things, we design things, we build things, and a lot of the core tissue types have corresponding analogies to the things that we build, right? So if you take a car, for example, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but like a car's nervous system is like all the wiring, from the battery to the alternator to the spark plugs, the computer chips. Like that's very similar to our nervous system. Muscular tissue might be compared to the engine, the belts, the drive shaft, all of those that make movement. The epithelial might be more of like the paint and wax on the outside of the car, and obviously the frame and the structure would be the connective tissues. So there's like these parallels between our engineering and what is engineered in nature. We don't look at a car and think that it evolved from things, right? We assume, you know, I mean,
Just saying.
the design evolved, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, you would never be like,
Yeah.
horse and buggy happened, and then we got cars.
Yeah.
It was wild.
Well,
Overnight.
like our ability to engineer evolved is really what happened. Yeah. And so like, yeah, it's just interesting. I think I'm calling out, it's interesting that we see things that we've made, and like, you know, we're a bit biased because we know we made them. But with life, we said it happened some other way. Like we know complex systems arise through intelligent action.
Except
Life-
in nature.
A life is a complex system, even more than anything that we've done, but it happened through evolution, not through intelligent action.
It seems almost like a prideful thing of like, well, we didn't do it, so it just happened. It's like, come on. Like
Yeah.
if we do it, we're like totally take credit for it. We put people on the moon. We built a rocket ship. Amazing. Curing cancer, not yet.
Allegedly, people on the moon.
Allegedly, sure. We're in a Hollywood studio, whatever you prefer. But then when we're like, if we didn't have a hand in it, us personally as the human race, we're like, it just happened. It probably just happened. So interesting.
Yeah.
We're quick to take credit for certain things and then just be like, I don't know. I don't know. I
It's
don't
true.
get it.
Yeah, it's true. So to kind of finish out this chapter, there's one other unique area of life that's worth calling out, and that's the life cycle of insects. It's actually pretty amazing. There are 3 different processes that insects use, and let's see if I can say them correctly. I probably would butcher this. Ametabolitism, hemametabolism, and holometabolism. So, ametabolitism is the simplest of the 3. That's where you have young insects called nymphs. They essentially have the same body plan as the adult. After emerging from the egg, the insect undergoes only changes in size but not shape as it matures. So some
Like a
examples.
human.
Kind of, yeah.
We're born the way we look and then we just get bigger.
Yes, yeah. That is basically what this type of insect does.
Okay.
An example would be like the silverfish bug. So the other one is hemametabolism, something of that nature. Probably butchering that. And it's also known as partial metamorphosis. This is where the insect undergoes gradual progressive changes in form. These insects, the change is through a process of what they like instars, which is a periods of growth of change, and then molts. So, you know,
Cicadas.
no, cicadas are not that, because they have, I believe they are full metamorphosis because they start as, well, maybe, I don't know for sure. I'd have to look that up. God. But basically, with each subsequent instar and molt, the nymph gradually changes into adult form until it reaches maturity and is able to breathe. Some examples are dragonflies, grasshoppers, and crickets. So complete metamorphosis. You've probably heard of metamorphosis before. You know, that's the classic caterpillar to butterfly. But that is actually the most common and complicated form of insect maturation.
I didn't realize that.
That is the most common.
I thought that it was either the first one where they're just like tiny and get big,
Mhm.
or like you said with crickets where they're the right
molting,
size,
yeah.
but they just like create the harder shell. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought butterflies
Most
were unique in that way. And
most of them start in a larva stage, which is just an insect that. And so they from the egg to the larva, they just eat basically. That's their job. And
Hungry,
then
Hungry Caterpillar.
Yeah.
Read the book if you don't know.
when the larval growth slows and stops, the organism becomes the pupa, and then so the pupa stage can have various variations. The most common is like the chrysalis or the cocoon of a butterfly or moth.
Yeah, maybe. Good.
But other insects just develop a pupa inside the last larval skin.
No kidding.
Yeah, which I think is what the cicada does, because like that's the like little. I don't know the
Skin?
things you find. I don't know for sure, but
Huh.
I'm not a what is it?
Entomologist.
So, but metamorphosis occurs when the pupa goes through a complete transformation of its body, which is super crazy. So like the whole creature liquefies into a soup. So like the whole body plan gets broken down and then gets reformed into the adult form.
Which is wild because if you go to basic evolution, what do they say? We crawled out of primordial ooze, okay? But you have this designed worm that then does that and turns into something totally different but totally put together. Like they turned into primordial soup in their little pocket.
Yeah, the whole body breaks down,
Yeah.
turns into mush, and then reforms
That's wild.
into the beautiful butterfly.
Transformation.
The hardest, so when you think about this in terms of evolution,
Yeah.
how does a creature evolve a life cycle like that?
Yeah.
Because the larval stage has no ability to breed. Only the adults finished after metamorphosis. Like that's the only time they breed. So like how do you get there? Like how do you get to that stage? That's a very difficult thing to understand in terms of in evolutionary terms. Like the pupa stage is an all or nothing proposition. It must complete the process to become an adult, or it'll die and never reproduce. So like the instructions for the final butterfly, if you will, has to be in place beforehand.
Right. That's crazy. That's wild. Like
Yeah.
that's a whole nother level.
It is. It entirely is. The organism could not survive a complete metamorphosis unless the entire process was fully programmed from the beginning.
Right. Because the assumption is when they're in that larva stage, like the caterpillar, and they're eating and eating and eating and eating, because they're basically going into wild hibernation. Like the amount of calories and the amount of energy that it must take to liquefy and then turn back into something completely different has to be outrageously high.
Yeah.
And so the preparation for that in one stage of development in order to get to that completely different, like you're going from like worm to bird.
Yeah.
Like not quite, but
Yeah,
that's
such
crazy.
like it's a large jump in complexity.
Yeah.
And it requires forethought and planning.
Like an inchworm to an eagle. Like what in the world? That's wild.
Yeah. One evolutionary entomologist said the biggest head scratcher in evolutionary biology has to be the origin of metamorphosis in insect larvae. Like,
There's a book about that. There's a short story, an old short story called Metamorphosis, where a guy turns into a beetle in his room. You should read it. It's a great short story, but that's what happens. He turns into a bug.
that would be
Let's
awesome.
watch The Fly.
I was thinking the same thing.
So good. It's a great short story.
But think about now apply the theory of intelligent design
Right.
to this problem, and it's not hard to explain at all, right? An intelligent actor programmed the behavior, like how that happens. It's not a hard thing to explain in that point. I think the counter to that would be like, well, that's not a satisfying answer.
Too bad.
And I think that might be what it comes down to a lot of from an evolutionary thing is like, I want to know how it works. And just to say, hey, an intelligent designer who did it.
But you
That
don't
doesn't
even have to
explain
do that. You can say an intelligent designer did it, and you can dive deep and watch the process to see exactly how he did it, as opposed to just like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I think that's a good call out. Like, just because humans designed a car doesn't
Right.
mean I can't learn how a car works.
Right. Like some
Yeah.
people are completely like you when you were a kid, you were completely fascinated by like how a computer works and tearing it apart and putting it back together. And that was something that another person put together over, or a lot of people over time to perfect it. And you would think that wouldn't be very interesting from a human discovery perspective, but it is. And there's nothing less amazing about it. And for whatever reason, instead of being like, somebody made this, I don't care who you want to call the deity at this point, but why wouldn't you want to dive in and figure out how they went about doing it, as opposed to just saying it just happened, don't ask questions? That seems
Yeah.
so counterintuitive of just how the human condition seems to be, which is we're curious. We want to know why something does what it does and who did it. And like archaeology, who did this? Why did they do it? How long ago did they do it? Let's figure all that out. And nature says that about the thing that put it together, and yet we're like, we're not interested.
Yeah.
That's so strange.
Yeah, and again, I think that gets back to like my biggest criticism is like intelligent design is a theory.
Yeah.
Like, and it might even be the right one. So if we are not exploring it, then we are stifling science in some way, right? Like if we are just going down the wrong road and no one is even considering what could be down this intelligent design road because they're just saying, no, that's just creationism and religious people trying to figure things out. That's how are you going to interpret the reality the right way? You can't. You have to start making systems up, and you have to start making these plausible, it could have happened this way arguments. And while be it that could be true, it's unfortunate to just say no. It's fundamentally against the idea of science in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, what does the evidence say? Like, that's the idea. That's why people get involved in science. Like, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I want to know what the evidence says.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if it points in the direction you don't want it to point in? And I think that's something where you have to work through that. And to be fair, it goes both directions. Where we also have to be like, well, what if I dive into something and it starts going in the direction that I'm not comfortable with?
Yep.
That is uncomfortable, and we have to figure out. Like that's where you either just put your hands up and walk away, or you're like, I want to figure this out. I want to dive in deeper. I want to discover these things as much as possible. And
be willing to also say, don't know.
Yeah.
Like, don't know for now, or don't know ever.
Yep.
Who knows? And be okay with that.
Yeah.
Because we can't know it all.
It's kind of in our nature to have an end result from the beginning and have everything start kind of pointing towards that. So that way, I think it's kind of in a way to glorify yourself in a way. So that way you can say that I'm right. If all your studies and experiments and everything points towards your original theory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, look what
It's
I did.
confirmation
I knew it.
bias.
Yes.
Yep.
Very
Which
true.
we're all guilty of to some level, but like, that's where we have to push that boundary and
Let other people push it too.
Yeah.
Because like that's what, like getting around other people like this, like we might not all agree on the same thing or whatever, but it's good to be like, well, have you considered this? No. Okay, well, try it, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me wonder, like, it is kind of a ridiculous situation, but it makes me think, because what if the science of archaeology was limited by materialistic explanations?
What do you mean? Explain.
So, archaeology, the digging up artifacts
Historical
and
things.
like looking at historical things.
Yeah.
Like if they were limited to only naturalistic explanations, they'd have to explain why they found this.
Oh, like a
bowl.
building.
this building
Oh,
via naturalistic processes. It's like, how did this building come about? How did this foundation come about? How did this ceramic wall come about?
Which
Well,
they
you know,
kind of do a little bit when it's like, this town was a myth. And we found a corner of the building. It was probably natural. And they're like, dig, dig, dig. Darn it, there's people down here.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a myth. This is like an actual town. Like,
Yeah, no, like they have to assume intelligent design in those things because we know that humans existed. So like there's like this precedent that hey, agencies existed so that we would expect to see past things from them.
right.
But that's not acceptable in any other science.
Yeah.
But why? You know, like even scientists themselves, many scientists believe that there are intelligences outside of Earth.
Yep.
Just by pure numbers game. So they're like, yeah, you know, there could be aliens out there. There probably is. Well, there's extra agencies. Like agency exists. We know it does. We are agents and we design things. And we see things that seem to be designed, yet we're ruling out the explanation of design as a potential.
It seems like unnecessary foolishness
It 100% does.
with zero religion built in.
Yeah.
It just seems like unnecessary foolishness.
Yeah, and ultimately, science suffers as a result because, like, when you shut down a road of explanation, now science is stifled. You think about some of the biggest breakthroughs in science; it was from radical thinkers who were thinking differently about the problem.
Yep.
It wasn't from people that were thinking about it like everyone else. It was from people who were like, what if it wasn't like any of that thing, but it was like this?
What if we put radium in our pockets?
Well, that was a bad idea, but
Radium.
yeah, like, you know, it's frustrating on some level because it's like, oh, what are we missing out on because we're not even entertaining the idea that there's agency in life. Well, I mean, that wraps up this chapter. Next month, we are going to talk about our body specifically. So we brought up the eye a lot, so we're going to talk about the eye more in detail in various aspects of our bodies where, you know, there's some reproduction aspects and digestion, all kinds of interesting things that are, you know, our designed bodies.
Yeah.
Is the topic.
So exciting.
It's actually a really interesting one.
Yes, it is.
I should bring in some of the books that I have, like that one book that guy wrote on.
That has the son named Ransom.
No, that's something.
Yeah. Oh, the doctor and the engineer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our
Yeah.
designed bodies. Isn't that what it's
Yeah, that one. But there's another one I'm thinking of, but
Okay.
doesn't matter.